My name is Clara. I am now 78 years old, and every now and then I find myself thinking back to that time when everything seemed perfect. I lived in a small town in Virginia called Charlottesville. It was the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. A place that, in my youth, felt like the very definition of peace. I was raised in the church, my parents were devout, and I became very close to my faith. I was only 23 when I married James. A good man, a hard worker, who, like me, had grown up in the church. Sundays were our most sacred days. We would wake up early, put on our best clothes, and go to Mass. Back then, the church was not just a place of worship, it was where I found support, comfort, and, in a way, my place in the world. I felt safe there, as if the church were a refuge, a shelter against life's troubles. At that time, I believed nothing could ever pull me away from that. Faith was my rock. But, like any story, things are not always what they seem, and that protection I believed in so firmly would one day be shattered. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. How could I? Those moments in church were more than mere rituals. They represented the security of a well-structured future. However, as time passed, a secret began to grow inside me. Something I knew could destroy everything I built around my faith. And what happened next? Well, that's what I am about to share now. The secret that once seemed so insignificant at first morphed into my downfall, and before long the church, that place I loved so much, would cease to be my home. What once felt safe turned into a nightmare. But let's take it step by step, as they say. What happened beneath the surface, my friends, was a revelation no one could have predicted, not even me, who had kept it so secretly within. The sun was shining bright that Sunday, illuminating the streets of Charlottesville, as if the town knew something was about to happen. I was nervous, not quite sure why. Maybe it was because it was the anniversary of James and me, and I wanted everything to be perfect. After Mass, we had planned a small lunch, just with our closest friends and some family. But what I didn't know was that that Sunday would be the last time I could enter the church without carrying the weight of my greatest secret. The Mass followed the usual ritual, but something felt off. I, who used to be the pillar of faith among everyone, felt a strange sensation in the air, as if the ground beneath my feet was beginning to shift. People were talking more than usual, yet no one dared to look each other in the eye. The atmosphere was heavy, as if a storm was about to break. That's when she approached me. Rachel, a young woman with curious eyes, who always lingered at the back of the church. She was never much of a talker, but she had a strange way of observing, as if she were absorbing every word, every gesture. I never imagined she would be the one responsible for revealing my secret. She came close to me, a smile on her face, but her eyes were different. There was concern, perhaps fear. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you after Mass. Something isn't right. I don't know what to do with this, but you need to know." My heart sank. I already knew what she was about to say. I knew I was on the brink of being uncovered, but I had no idea how or when it would happen. The secret I had guarded for so many years, the secret I thought I would carry to my grave, was about to be exposed. After Mass, the church felt like a great maze of whispers and furtive glances. James was there, happy and distracted, greeting others, oblivious to what was about to unfold. But I could no longer focus on anything. Anxiety grew with every step I took. And when Rachel finally approached, I could see she was conflicted, hesitant. "Clara," she began, "I know you asked me to keep it a secret, but I couldn't. I heard. People are talking. I can't help but think you need to know. Your secret, Clara. It's being spoken about." I froze. The secret. It was as if the ground had vanished beneath my feet. I thought I would never be discovered. How could I be? I, who had spent my entire life trying to be a good wife, a good woman in the church, how could this have spread? But what she was saying was clear. What I had done, what I had hidden, now everyone knew. The secret was not just a mistake. It was not just a youthful weakness. It was something darker, something I never imagined would see the light of day. I had aborted. At the time, James and I were facing financial difficulties. I was only 19 and pregnant, but in a desperate decision, we made a choice that seemed like the only way out. I couldn't tell anyone. Not my family, not the church, nobody. Because I knew that if they found out, it would be the end of everything I believed in, of everything I had built. But now, that secret was being brutally exposed, and I had no idea how or if I would survive it. Rachel didn't need to provide more details. I knew enough. What had happened in the past was coming to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. I looked at her, but couldn't find the words. The pain was unbearable. What to do now? How to return to that church where I had hidden for so long? How to explain it to James, to everyone who once called me friend, daughter, wife? How to look in the mirror again without feeling that everything I knew was crumbling? I left the church that morning with the feeling that the whole world was watching, judging, waiting for me to fall. I didn't know what to do, nor where to go. All I wanted was to disappear, to vanish from that place where everyone knew me, where everyone thought I was pure, upright, always correct. But who was I really? Someone carrying such a heavy burden that I could barely breathe. I remember returning home, where James awaited me with a smile, completely unaware of what was going on in my mind. He talked about lunch, about how full the church was that day, about the lives of all our friends. I couldn't respond. I just listened to his words, as if I were in another world. My body was there, but my mind was distant, lost in the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my head. The weight of guilt was so overwhelming that I felt suffocated. Not only by the abortion itself, but by the shame of hiding it from everyone. I felt dirty, unworthy of being in the presence of those who trusted me so much. I was just waiting for the moment everyone would find out what I had done, and I knew that when that happened, there would be no turning back. I was already condemned, but I didn't yet know how or when the sentence would be carried out. And it didn't take long. The community, which I thought of as family, soon turned against me. People began to look at me differently. There were murmurs, avoidant glances. The conversations in which I once participated with such enthusiasm now felt distant, as if I were a ghost trying to infiltrate a world that no longer accepted me. That Sunday after Mass, the church became a strange place for me. Where once I felt welcomed, now I felt an overwhelming pressure. The words of others were sharper than any sword. It wasn't just the disapproving looks. The whispers spread like fire. "Clara, did you know?" I couldn't believe what they were saying. The words pierced my soul like arrows. The prayer meetings, which had always been a refuge for me, turned into a nightmare. I felt people avoiding my presence, treating me as if I were a greater sinner than anyone else. All eyes were on me, but no one seemed willing to help. Instead, it was as if I were being punished not only for my mistakes, but for the fact that I was no longer worthy of acceptance. And the words that hurt me the most came from within the church itself. The priest, who had always preached about forgiveness and redemption, began to avoid my gaze. He no longer called on me to help with the Mass functions. I, who once was one of his most fervent believers, was now treated like a nuisance, a shame to the congregation. It was at the end of a service, about a week after everything had begun to spread, that I knew I was being watched. But I never imagined the confrontation would come so soon. The priest called me to speak, and with him were some of the church's more influential members. The atmosphere was tense. He began with soft words, as if trying to prepare someone for a harsh sentence. "Clara," he said, "we know what happened. We can no longer ignore this." Each word felt like a blow to my chest. Shame, humiliation. Everything started to mix into a whirlwind I didn't know how to control. They didn't give me a chance to defend myself. They didn't ask me why or how I ended up in this situation. They simply pointed out my mistake, as if it were the only thing defining who I was. The moment I had feared finally arrived. I was called back to the center of the church, in front of everyone, and the priest, with his firm voice, said, "The church can no longer—" I tried to speak, to justify myself, but my words wouldn't come out. I didn't know what else to say. The pain was so great that I couldn't process it. I looked around. The faces that were once familiar now seemed cold and distant. I, who had grown up here, who had been so loved, was now a stranger. A woman who no longer deserved to belong. The sharpest, deepest pain didn't come from being expelled from the church. It came from losing my home, my family, my refuge. Because for me, the church wasn't just a place of worship. It was my life, the center of everything. There were the people who had watched me grow, who had seen me as someone who, despite my flaws, had a good heart, someone who tried to be fair and right. I believed in that. But now, with a single word, all those years of trust and support had disintegrated. James, my husband, also didn't know how to react. He was beside me, but the shock of everything had separated us. He looked at me as if he no longer knew who I was. I couldn't blame him. How could he look at me the same way after what had happened? How could he see me as the woman he married when, in reality, I had hidden something so dark from him? In those days, my home became a place of solitude. I distanced myself from the few friends who still had the courage to reach out. They treated me with pity, no longer with the genuine friendship of before. How could anyone still approach me without feeling the weight of what had happened? I was the scandal of the town now, and the pain of being rejected by the only community I had ever trusted was unbearable. But I didn't yet know that this pain, this rejection, would only be the beginning of a journey of self-discovery. A journey of facing my own truth and trying, perhaps, to find myself again. In the days following my expulsion, what hurt the most was the solitude. It wasn't just the fact that my community had rejected me, but the internal loneliness, the feeling of being lost within myself. All those years of faith, of dedication to the church, now felt like a lie. How could I have come to this point? How could I have betrayed everything I believed in, everything I preached? James didn't speak much. He tried to be understanding, but his coldness spoke louder. He was hurt, and I understood. How could he see me the same way after everything? I knew that what I did wasn't something easy to forgive. But, deep down, the greater pain wasn't the separation from him, nor the public humiliation. It was the fact that when the church rejected me, I also rejected myself. I no longer knew who I was without the faith that had guided me. It was in that moment of deep anguish that I decided to seek someone. Someone who, unlike everyone else, might offer me the forgiveness I most desired. Myself. I spent days wandering aimlessly through the streets of Charlottesville, trying to find some form of redemption. I found refuge in nature, among the trees and fields that had always been my escape, but nothing seemed to lighten the weight within me. It was on a rainy day that I went to the house of a woman named Sarah, an old friend of my mother. Sarah had always been a welcoming person, a woman who over the years had kept her faith intact, but who had never been harsh or unforgiving towards others. She always spoke about forgiveness, and I thought that perhaps she would be the only one who could still see me with compassion. I knocked on Sarah's door with trembling hands, my heart pounding. I didn't know what I expected from her, but I knew I needed to talk to someone. She opened the door with that warm smile I remembered from her youth. Apparently, she wasn't surprised by my visit. Perhaps she already knew I was seeking some answer, some way to cope with my pain. We sat in the living room, and the silence between us was heavy, as if all the words I wanted to say were stuck in my throat. I knew Sarah wouldn't judge me, but still, the words felt too difficult. Finally she spoke, breaking the silence. "Clara, life is made of choices. We can't change what happened, but we can choose what to do with it now. You don't need to seek forgiveness from others or from the church. The most important thing is for you to forgive yourself, to understand that even in our failures, here is space to start over." I didn't know how to respond. I was looking for a simple answer, a direct path to redemption. But what Sarah was telling me wasn't simple. She didn't offer me easy excuses or quick solutions. She challenged me to look inside myself and accept who I was, with all that I had done and all my imperfections. Sarah taught me that forgiveness doesn't come from the outside in, but from the inside out. I needed to accept that, despite everything that had happened, there was still a chance for me to rebuild. I didn't know how I would do that, but I was willing to try. Life went on, and although I still felt the pain of rejection from the church, it was my relationship with James that affected me most. The distance between us grew with each passing day. He was a good man, but I knew that the trust we had in each other was broken. How could he forgive me when I couldn't even forgive myself? After weeks of silence, I finally decided to talk to him. I knew he was going through the same torment I was, but pride and pain kept us from speaking. We sat at the table, and it was then that for the first time, I opened up completely. I spoke about the guilt, the weight of the decision we made back then, and the fear I had carried since that moment. And, more than anything, I spoke about what I wanted for our future. I saw in James's words a deep sadness, but also surprise. He didn't expect me to be so open, so vulnerable. He listened to me without interrupting, and in the end he simply said, "I don't know if I can forgive you right now, Clara. But maybe, if you find a way to forgive yourself, I can try too." That was the first step. It wasn't a magical solution. It wasn't an instant change. But it was the beginning of a journey that I knew would be long, difficult, but possible. Each day, I began to accept the pain I felt, the truth that, despite having made a grave mistake, I was still worthy of seeking peace. The church rejected me. James rejected me. But I could no longer reject myself. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be quick, but I needed to find a path to healing that was solely mine. The first step was to accept the truth about who I was at that moment, and to stop hiding my pain. I no longer had the church to support me, but I found comfort in other forms of faith, in the small things in life that I had previously overlooked. Sometimes healing comes from unexpected places, and I began to understand that my journey didn't have to be made alone. But, most importantly, I began to rebuild myself, not from the image others had of me, but from the acceptance I needed to have of myself. In the following months, the emptiness left by my expulsion from the church wasn't easily filled. The pain of seeing all the pillars that supported my life collapse made me question everything I believed. I had lost my community. My connection with God felt distant, and even the prayers I recited seemed empty. But, as often happens in many stories of redemption, it was in the moment of greatest darkness that I found a new form of faith. Not the faith I used to practice, with rigid rules and expectations of perfection, but a deeper, more personal faith. I began to understand that spirituality didn't depend on a temple or a group of people, but rather on an intimate relationship with myself and the universe around me. It wasn't easy. I began to walk alone, without the security of the church's walls. But I found comfort in simple things. The chirping of birds, the sound of rain tapping against the window, the beauty of a tranquil sunrise. These little things became my new way of connecting with something greater. Faith no longer needed to be defined by external norms, but by an internal experience that only I could understand. My relationship with James continued to be a challenge. He was trying, but there was still much resentment between us. What had happened wasn't something he could simply forget. The pain of being betrayed, the loss of trust, were deep scars that wouldn't heal easily. But something new was developing between us, something that hadn't existed before. Sincerity. I was willing to be honest, even about my flaws, and he slowly began to see that. It wasn't an instant reconciliation, but a process. I started to dedicate more time to caring for myself, to rebuilding myself as a person, before trying to rebuild what we had. Over time, he began to notice this change in me. We started to talk more, to share our fears and expectations, without the barriers that had once separated us. It wasn't an easy path, but I was beginning to feel that perhaps there was hope for us. The greatest obstacle I still faced, beyond personal suffering and the reconstruction of my relationship with James, was the judgment from the community. The condescending looks, The words of disdain and the whispers still haunted me. I found myself increasingly isolated, as if I was being pursued by a mistake I had already admitted and faced. But the truth was that I began to learn how to protect myself from criticism and distance myself from those who tried to belittle me. I discovered that the shame I felt didn't just stem from my mistakes, but from my need for validation from others. I needed to start freeing myself from this need for approval, and little by little, I found the strength to be who I truly am, without worrying about others' opinions. When everything seemed lost, I started giving myself a chance to begin anew. It took a lot of courage. I looked in the mirror, not as the ashamed woman everyone saw, but as the woman who fought to survive under the weight of her own guilt. Gradually, I learned to see the strong woman who was there, waiting to be recognized. She wasn't a perfect woman, but a real woman who made difficult choices, regretted them, yet also strived to learn and grow. It was in this process of self-overcoming that I began to truly accept myself. I couldn't go back in time to change what I had done, but I could do something now, take care of myself, love myself, and learn to be kinder to myself. With each small step, my self-esteem grew stronger. The woman who once felt broken and worthless started to see herself differently. It wasn't an easy decision, but over time, I began to wonder if it was possible to return to the church, that community that once embraced me. I no longer had the same expectations. I didn't want to be the perfect Clara everyone expected, but rather the Clara I had become. I'm perfect, but honest. I sought out a new priest, someone who, like Sarah, could understand that people aren't defined by their mistakes, but by the choices they make from them. I shared my story, with all its details, and surprisingly, I was met with compassion. He told me that we are all fallible, and that instead of distancing myself from faith, I should use it as a tool to heal my wounds. I started attending church again, but this time not in search of others' approval, but to strengthen my own faith and my connection with God. It was a gradual process, but I felt welcomed, not by the judgment of perfect people, but by the understanding of a God who knew my weaknesses and yet accepted me. Finally, I reached the moment when I could forgive myself. The forgiveness didn't come overnight, nor was it an easy process. But over time, I realized that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means accepting that, although we can't change the past, we can change how we deal with it. When I looked in the mirror one last time, I no longer saw a woman marked by shame, but a woman who had risen, even when everything seemed lost. The pain, the guilt, the shame, they no longer held the same weight. I was finally free. Forgiveness not only freed me from the chains that bound me, but it also gave me the strength to live in a new way. Not perfectly, but authentically. I no longer needed to carry the burden of what I had done in the past. The future was now before me, and I was ready to face it with courage, knowing that, regardless of everything, I deserved peace. The journey I've shared with you wasn't easy, and with each step, I discovered that true freedom comes from acceptance and forgivenesses, especially self-forgiveness. No matter how much the past haunts us, there is always a chance to start over, to rebuild our lives, and find inner peace. I am proof that even when everything seems lost, we can rise, learn from our mistakes, and move forward. If you identified with my story or found something that touched your heart, I would love to hear what you think. Leave your comment below and share your own experience if you feel comfortable doing so. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel and follow more stories of overcoming, learning, and redemption. Your journey could also inspire someone. Let's walk together in this quest for healing and renewal.